You're in violation of community standards. Remove yourself from this property immediately. 3 days. I'd been on my grandfather's ranch for exactly 3 days when Diane Sullivan came roaring up my driveway with 2 police cruisers and a clipboard thick enough to be a weapon. The December morning was cold enough to see breath in the air, frost still clinging to the fence posts. And here she was screaming about agricultural violations like I'd detonated a bomb instead of unpacking boxes on land my family had owned since 1947. Ma'am, please step back and let us handle this, Officer Mackenzie said. But Diane wasn't having it. She was in full battle mode, radiating an intensity that cut through the winter chill, with that look in her eyes that said she'd crushed people before and would do it again. Officer, this man is operating illegal livestock facilities in a residential zone. She jabbed a manicured finger at my barn like it had personally offended her. Cattle, farm equipment, noise violations. It's all in the complaint I filed yesterday. 3 separate violations of our community covenants. I took a slow sip of coffee. Watching this woman I'd never met declare war on my existence, and felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the December weather. What Diane Sullivan didn't know, what she couldn't know because she'd never bothered to research who owned the land she thought she controlled, was that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her 15-year reign. As Meadowbrook Estates HOA president, she declared war on the one person in this entire county who had the legal authority to end her corruption permanently. But I wasn't going to tell her that yet. Not when she was digging her own grave so enthusiastically. My name is Marcus Washington. I'm 45 years old. And 3 days ago, I inherited 1,000 acres of Colorado ranch land from my grandfather, Samuel Washington, a man who'd spent the last decade of his life documenting every illegal thing this woman and her HOA had done to terrorize this community. The folder sitting in my study contained enough evidence to send Diane Sullivan to federal prison. But Samuel's final instructions had been clear. Let them reveal the full scope of their corruption before you destroy them. Let them attack you. Let them show the world exactly what they're capable of doing to innocent people. So when Diane Sullivan came at me with police and threats and that entitled fury that comes from 15 years of unchallenged authority, I didn't pull out the documents that would end this confrontation in 30 seconds. I just smiled and let her keep talking. Mr. Washington. Officer Mackenzie approached with the weary tone of someone who'd been dragged into a neighborhood dispute he didn't understand. I'm Officer Mackenzie. This is Officer Torres. We received complaints about unauthorized agricultural operations on this property. Ma'am here says you're violating residential zoning codes. I'm a black man in rural Colorado. I know exactly what it looks like when police show up at your property because some white woman with a clipboard decided you don't belong. I'd spent my entire life navigating these situations, staying calm, while people who looked like Diane Sullivan called the cops first and asked questions never. But this time was different. This time I had something Diane didn't know about legal authority that would shatter everything she thought she understood about power in this community. Officer, I appreciate you responding to the complaint, I said, setting my coffee mug on the porch railing with deliberate calm. But I think there might be some confusion about jurisdiction here. This property has been operating as a working ranch since 1947. My grandfather, Samuel Washington, owned this land outright, and he left it to me with very specific instructions about how to handle people who might not understand the legal complexities involved. Diane's jaw tightened, highlighting her glossy red lips, which stood out starkly against the frost. The legal complexities are very simple. Mr. Washington. She adjusted the crimson-red blazer that was draped loosely over her shoulders, revealing a deep V-neck black silk top that looked far too thin for the weather but undeniably striking. Every property in Meadowbrook Estates falls under our HOA covenants. That includes agricultural properties that were improperly grandfathered in. We've successfully brought dozens of non-compliant properties into line over the years. The threat was clear. She shifted her weight, the slit in her black pencil skirt revealing glossy red high heels that dug into my gravel driveway. Dozens of properties, I repeated, letting that sink in. Watching the winter wind catch her shoulder-length wavy wine-red hair, that's interesting. Tell me, Mrs. Sullivan, when exactly was your HOA established? 2003. She said with the confidence of someone reciting absolute truth. Our incorporation documents clearly show boundary lines that include every parcel in this area, including your ranch. Period. Officer Mackenzie was looking around the property now, taking in the established nature of the barn, the equipment sheds, the livestock facilities that had obviously been here for decades. I could see the doubt starting to creep into his expression. Mrs. Sullivan, I said carefully, I think you'll find that the recorded easements and pre-HOA covenants governing this property tell a very different story than your incorporation documents suggest. Agricultural operations that predate community development carry significant legal weight. The confidence in my voice seemed to catch her off guard. She gripped her folder tighter, knuckles going white against the crimson sleeves of her fitted blazer. Are you threatening legal action? She demanded, her glossy red lips curling into a sneer. Because Richard, my husband, runs the most successful real estate law firm in this county. We've dealt with people like you before. People who think they can ignore community standards and do whatever they want. People like me. I let that hang in the December air for a moment. That's an interesting phrase. Mrs. Sullivan. Very educational. Mackenzie cleared his throat. Ma'am, when exactly was this HOA established? And what's the legal basis for claiming jurisdiction over agricultural properties that predate your organization? Diane's confidence wavered for the first time. Our incorporation documents. The incorporation documents that your husband's law firm prepared? I interrupted. The ones that made some creative interpretations of actual property lines to maximize your HOA's apparent scope? Those documents? The color drained from her face, making her wine-red hair look even darker by comparison. Just slightly, but enough for me to know I'd hit something she hadn't expected anyone to know about. I don't know what you think you've discovered, she said, and voice taking on a sharper edge. But I can assure you that Meadowbrook Estates HOA has full legal authority over every property within our boundaries. And you, Mr. Washington, are in violation of multiple covenants that you agreed to when you inherited this property. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone and tapping the screen, I didn't agree to anything. But I appreciate you making your position clear in front of witnesses. I showed Officer Mackenzie a photo of a document, just the header, nothing more. But it was enough to see his eyebrows rise. Sir, is that a founding family exemption certificate? Among other things, I replied. Officer, I think there might be some jurisdictional confusion that Mrs. Sullivan and I need to work out privately, through proper legal channels. With full documentation of all communications and claims made by both parties, Diane was staring at my phone screen like it had personally betrayed her. her chest rising and falling beneath the black silk top. Those expired when Samuel died, did they? I asked. That's a very specific legal interpretation. I look forward to discussing it with your husband's firm through official channels. With everything documented for the record, the confrontation lasted maybe 25 minutes total, but it felt like watching tectonic plates shift. Diane made threats, her red heels clicking impatiently on the porch steps. The officers asked questions. I provided just enough information to plant doubt without revealing the full scope of what I knew. When they finally left, Diane's silver Lexus kicking up gravel as she sped away. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been waiting 3 days to call. David. It's Marcus? Yeah. They took the bait, exactly like Samuel predicted. Diane Sullivan just declared war on someone she should have researched first. My college roommate and attorney laughed on the other end. How bad was it? She threatened me with her husband's law firm, claimed the HOA owns my 1,000 acres, and did it all in front of 2 cops who are now probably wondering what they walked into. Perfect. That gives us our opening. Start documenting everything. I looked out over the property that Diane thought she could control with clipboards and suburban intimidation tactics. The December sun was climbing higher, burning off the frost, revealing the land that my grandfather had spent 60 years building into something meaningful. Diane Sullivan had just committed to a fight she couldn't win against an opponent she'd never bothered to investigate. But she was about to get an education. 3 days in, and the war had officially begun. The dust had barely settled when I found myself standing in Samuel's study, surrounded by boxes of documents that held the keys to everything Diane Sullivan thought she understood about power in Meadowbrook. The mahogany desk where my grandfather had planned his response still dominated the room, its surface covered with legal papers that told a very different story than the one Diane had been operating under for 15 years, 6 months earlier. When I'd first learned I was inheriting the ranch and discovered the systematic harassment campaign that had been targeting it even before Samuel's death, I'd made a decision that seemed insane to most people. Instead of immediately asserting my rights, I chose to let them dig their own grave deeper while building an airtight case. The strategy required patience. It required enduring harassment. It required watching them attack not just me, but innocent people who got caught in the crossfire. But standing there looking at Samuel's carefully organized evidence, I knew it would be worth every moment of discomfort. My phone buzzed. Text from David Parker, my attorney, coffee shop on Main. 20 minutes. Need to discuss what just happened. The drive into town took me past Meadowbrook Estates, where identical houses sat on quarter-acre lots like pieces on a chessboard, white picket fences, mandatory landscape standards, suburban uniformity that made developers rich and homeowners miserable. The contrast with my 1,000-acre ranch couldn't have been more stark. David was waiting at our usual corner table, laptop open, legal pads covered with notes, at 45. He'd built a successful practice by understanding property law complexities most people never encountered. That was faster than we expected, he said as I sat down. 3 days from move-in to police harassment, even for Diane Sullivan. That's aggressive. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were copies of the plat maps Diane had referenced, along with David's analysis of how they'd been manipulated. Here's the situation. David said, pulling up a survey map, your ranch is 1,000 acres total. In 2001, Samuel subdivided 47 acres on the southern border into 12 residential lots. Those lots joined the newly formed Meadowbrook HOA in 2003. But Samuel wasn't just a founding member, he was the primary landowner who made the entire development possible. He pointed to a section of the incorporation documents. The founding family has permanent advisory authority and exemption rights for agricultural operations. Those rights transferred to you the day you moved into the ranch house. And Diane doesn't know that yet. Diane thinks those rights died with Samuel. She's been operating under that assumption for years. David opened his laptop, but there's more. Linda Collins, she's the HOA treasurer. She's discovered some serious financial irregularities. Linda Collins. I'd met her twice at community meetings. A certified public accountant who'd moved to Meadowbrook 3 years ago. Smart. Principled. And apparently brave enough to look closely at the books. How serious? Over $180,000 in suspicious expenses over the past 2 years. Consulting fees paid to Thornfield Legal Associates, that's Richard's firm, that are 300% above market rates. Landscaping contracts to vendors owned by board members' family members. Equipment purchases from companies that don't exist at listed addresses. I let out a low whistle. Linda's motivation for exposing this? Personal. Her elderly father was driven from a community in Arizona by HOA harassment over medical equipment violations. He died shortly after the forced relocation. She joined Meadowbrook's board, hoping to prevent similar abuse. But instead, she found corruption that makes her father's situation look mild. The weight of that settled between us. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about people's lives being destroyed by a system that had forgotten it was supposed to serve the community, not terrorize it. How long before we can file formal complaints? I asked. We need more documentation. Every illegal action they take strengthens our case exponentially. Diane thinks she's increasing pressure to force compliance. She doesn't realize she's creating evidence for criminal prosecution. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Washington? A woman's voice. Nervous. This is Linda Collins. I'm the HOA treasurer. I need to talk to you about something urgent. It's about the finances. And Diane. And can we meet somewhere private? I looked at David, who'd clearly heard enough to understand what this meant. Linda. I'm at Miller's Coffee House with my attorney, David Parker. Can you come here? 15 minutes. She hung up. This just got complicated, David said quietly. Linda arrived exactly 15 minutes later, carrying a leather portfolio that she held like it contained state secrets. She was in her early 40s. Dark hair pulled back, dressed professionally despite it being Saturday morning. The stress showed in the tight lines around her eyes. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sitting down and immediately pulling out a thick folder. I've been documenting financial irregularities for 6 months. After Diane called the police on you yesterday, I realized I can't stay silent anymore. She spread spreadsheets across the table. This is just the beginning. Consulting fees, vendor kickbacks, equipment purchases that never happened. But there's something else, something I discovered last week that changes everything. She pulled out a bank statement. Diane has been paying herself an unauthorized salary of $5,000 per month for the past 3 years. $180,000 total. It's completely illegal for HOA board members in Colorado to receive compensation without membership approval. She's been hiding it in the budget under management consulting fees. David was already taking notes. his legal mind processing the implications. Linda, you understand that exposing this makes you a target? Diane Sullivan has shown she's willing to destroy people who challenge her authority. My father died believing ordinary people couldn't fight back against corrupt systems. Linda said quietly, I'm not going to live with that same belief. Over the next hour, Linda walked us through a financial empire built on fraud. Richard's law firm had billed the HOA over $400,000 in the past 5 years for services that should have cost maybe $50,000. Board members awarded contracts to their relatives' companies at inflated rates. Violation fines were being collected but never properly accounted for. How many people has Diane driven out of the community? I asked. Linda's expression hardened. At least 20 families in the past 5 years that I know of. Elderly residents forced to sell because they couldn't afford the fines for violations like improper mailbox angle or excessive vegetation height. People with disabilities harassed over medical equipment? One woman died in a nursing home 6 months after Diane forced her relocation. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small for the weight of what we were discussing. Marcus. Linda said, using my first name for the first time, I know you have legal authority over the HOA. Samuel told me about the founding family exemptions before he died. He said when you inherited the ranch, you'd have the power to end this. He made me promise to help you when the time came. I looked at David, who was carefully not meeting my eyes. We both knew what this meant. Linda wasn't just providing evidence, she was volunteering to be a public target for Diane's retaliation. Linda, if you help us, Diane will come after you with everything she has. Your job, your home, your reputation, nothing will be off limits. I know. She met my eyes with the kind of resolve that comes from watching someone you love be destroyed by the exact thing you're now fighting. But if we don't stop her, how many more families will she hurt? How many more people will die thinking they were powerless? That's how it started, 3 days into my inheritance. And I'd gone from solo operation to conspiracy with an accountant who had nothing to gain except the satisfaction of justice. We spent the rest of the morning planning. David would prepare preliminary filings to establish legal standing. Linda would continue documenting financial crimes while maintaining her cover as treasurer. I would endure whatever harassment Diane threw at me, documenting every violation of my rights. Walking Linda to her car, I felt compelled to warn her one more time. Once you're publicly connected to this fight, there's no going back. Diane will make your life hell. She already is. Linda replied, unlocking her door. 2 weeks ago, I filed questions about vendor contracts. Yesterday, I got a violation notice for my garden being excessively natural instead of properly manicured. This morning, I found my trash cans had been knocked over, probably by the same compliance patrol that photographs everything I do. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Marcus. My father spent his last months in a nursing home, broken by a system he couldn't fight. If I can help take down the person who represents everything that killed him, the harassment is worth it. Driving back to the ranch, I passed Linda's house, where I could see her working in the garden that had earned those violation notices. Even from the road, I could tell it was beautiful native plants, sustainable landscaping, the kind of thing that should be encouraged, not punished. Diane Sullivan had built her empire on making people afraid, on crushing anyone who questioned her authority, on proving that challenging the system was too expensive, too painful, too dangerous for ordinary people to risk. But she'd made one critical mistake. she'd assumed everyone could be intimidated. And she'd never met Marcus Washington or Linda Collins. 2 months into what Diane Sullivan probably considered her systematic campaign to drive me from the community, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning sorting through a stack of certified mail thick enough to use as kindling, $4,200 in accumulated fines, improper mailbox mounting angle, excessive vegetation height, unauthorized gravel maintenance, livestock odor complaints, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain appropriate seasonal decorative displays. The December snow had hit hard over the past few weeks, blanketing the ranch in white that somehow made Diane's harassment feel even more absurd. She was sending compliance officers out in freezing temperatures to photograph my barn like it was a crime scene. Mina Williams drove 12 miles in the snow to photograph my livestock water troughs. Patricia Ross brought a decibel meter to measure tractor noise at 7 in the morning, apparently unaware that agricultural noise exemptions existed in every farming community in America. These women had turned HOA enforcement into a crusade. That morning's mail brought an escalation that crossed lines even I hadn't expected, a formal complaint filed with the county building inspector, claiming I was operating an unlicensed commercial facility in violation of residential zoning codes. 17 residents had signed it. My phone rang as I was reading the building inspector's notice. Linda Collins. And her voice carried a tension I hadn't heard since our first meeting. Marcus. They filed a professional misconduct complaint against me with the State Accounting Board. Richard Thornfield personally delivered it yesterday, alleging I provided confidential HOA financial information to unauthorized parties. They're recommending investigation for ethics violations and potential criminal breach of fiduciary duty. The attack on Linda meant we'd entered a new phase. Professional complaints could take months to resolve, during which Linda's reputation and client relationships would suffer regardless of the outcome. They're targeting my employer too. Linda continued. Diane called my firm yesterday, suggesting my involvement in property disputes compromises my objectivity. She implied my personal relationship with you represents a conflict of interest. Personal relationship? I asked carefully. We've been working together for 2 months. Marcus. Meeting twice a week to review evidence. Having dinners where we talk about justice and the kind of community we want to build. She paused. Diane's spies noticed. And now she's weaponizing it. The weight of responsibility for Linda's situation was crushing. She'd volunteered to help expose corruption. And now she was paying the price for standing up to a system most people just accepted as unchangeable. David's preparing responses to both complaints. I said, professional misconduct allegations based on exposing financial corruption rarely survive scrutiny. What I didn't tell Linda was that Diane's escalation meant we were approaching the point where more decisive action would be necessary. We couldn't let them destroy innocent people while we built the perfect case. That afternoon brought County Building Inspector Tom Walsh, whose relationship with Richard Thornfield's firm was rumored to be closer than professional ethics allowed. Walsh arrived with official demeanor and a clipboard full of violation notices. Mr. Washington? I'm here to investigate complaints about unlicensed commercial operations and zoning violations, Walsh announced, surveying my ranch buildings with obvious skepticism. Multiple residents report industrial activity inconsistent with residential agricultural designation. Inspector Walsh. I'd be happy to provide documentation of this property's agricultural designation and historical use. I pulled out permits and certificates David had prepared. Washington Ranch has maintained continuous agricultural operations since 1947, All current activities fall under established use patterns and county agricultural exemptions. The inspection lasted 3 hours. Walsh photographing details that seemed more relevant to building a harassment case than conducting legitimate code enforcement. His questions revealed fundamental misunderstanding of agricultural operations. But he approached each building with the suspicious attitude of someone convinced violations existed if he just looked hard enough. Some of these structures appear modified without proper permits. Walsh finally announced, pointing to a barn addition completed 15 years earlier under different code requirements. County records don't show building permits for several outbuildings. His findings ignored grandfather provisions and agricultural exemptions that made permits unnecessary. The building inspector's report would provide Diane with ammunition for her next phase, probably involving forced compliance with current codes for buildings that predated those requirements. Every bureaucratic overreach created additional evidence for the case we were building. That evening, I drove to Linda's house to discuss strategy. She answered the door, looking exhausted, stress showing in ways that made my chest tighten with guilt. "They're freezing me out at work," she said, as we sat in her living room, not firing me, but slowly reducing my client assignments while they review potential conflicts. "It's death by 1,000 cuts. We can accelerate the timeline," I offered. "File criminal complaints now instead of waiting for more documentation." "No." Linda's voice was firm. "If we move too soon, they'll claim ignorance of the violations. We need them to reveal the full scope." My father gave up fighting because the cost seemed too high. I'm not making that mistake. We spent the next hour reviewing evidence. But the conversation shifted to more personal territory. Linda talked about her father, about watching a good man be broken by a system designed to crush individual resistance. I talked about Samuel, about inheriting not just property, but responsibility for finishing a battle my grandfather had started. "Marcus," Linda said quietly, "whatever happens with my job or the complaints, I don't regret this. Some fights are worth having, regardless of the personal cost." Standing on my porch later that night, watching December stars over land Samuel had spent 60 years building, I felt the weight of responsibility for both Linda's sacrifice and the community's future. Tomorrow would bring new harassment, fresh violations, escalating pressure designed to break our resolve. But tonight I was reminded why some battles couldn't be abandoned just because they were difficult. Diane Sullivan had chosen the wrong ranch and the wrong rancher to mess with, and she was about to discover that patience had its limits. 4 months into what had become Diane Sullivan's masterclass in legal overreach, I was finally ready to show her the first glimpse of what she'd gotten herself into. The morning started with what she probably considered her knockout punch. A cease and desist letter from Richard Thornfield's law firm demanding immediate compliance with all outstanding HOA violations or face property liens and forced sale proceedings. The 20-page document threatened everything from property seizure to criminal charges for activities that were completely legal on agricultural land. It revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both property law and HOA authority that would make their eventual downfall even more satisfying. Instead of being terrified into surrender, I called David and told him it was time to deploy Phase 2. Diane just handed us everything we need to demonstrate abuse of legal process, I said, scanning Richard's signature on what amounted to legal harassment that crossed multiple lines of professional ethics. The state HOA complaint we filed that afternoon was a masterpiece of legal precision David had been crafting for months. 23 pages documented violations. Financial irregularities and procedural abuse painted a picture of systematic corruption extending far beyond simple mismanagement. The complaint included copies of every harassment letter, documentation of financial kickbacks to board members' family businesses, and evidence of coordinated retaliation against residents who'd challenged board decisions. But the real bomb was buried in an addendum referencing Washington Ranch's special status under original HOA incorporation documents. Without revealing my full authority, the complaint noted that certain founding family property rights had been violated through illegal expansion of HOA jurisdiction. It was a legal warning shot designed to make Diane and Richard realize they were fighting someone with access to documents they'd forgotten existed. The community response was immediate. Within hours, my phone started ringing with calls from neighbors who'd been quietly documenting their own harassment experiences. Maria Santos, a widow whose late husband had served on the original board, shared the most devastating example. They drove Mrs. Patterson from her home last year over medical equipment violations, claimed oxygen tanks violated aesthetic standards. She died 6 months later in a nursing facility. Marcus, I've been waiting 3 years for someone with resources to fight back, Maria said, frustration clear in her voice. The stories revealed a pattern that made my situation look mild. Families forced out over manufactured violations, elderly residents bankrupted by fines, people with disabilities harassed until they couldn't afford to stay. The community was finally finding its voice. Linda's situation had stabilized somewhat after David filed counter-complaints challenging the professional misconduct allegations as retaliation for whistleblowing. Her employer, faced with evidence the complaints were politically motivated, had quietly restored her client assignments. But the stress had deepened our relationship in ways normal circumstances never could. I never imagined standing up for what's right could be this complicated. Linda said as we walked through ranch property one December evening, checking on livestock that had become unwitting participants in a legal battle. My father used to say, corruption thrives when good people convince themselves they're powerless. I finally understand what he meant. The first crack in Diane's confidence appeared at the emergency board meeting called to address the state complaint. 23 residents attended the largest gathering in HOA history, and the mood was distinctly different from previous meetings. People who'd been silent for years were asking pointed questions about financial expenditures, vendor relationships, and the legal basis for enforcement campaigns. Mr. Washington's complaint contains serious allegations, said Robert Walker, Linda's brother-in-law. Before we dismiss these claims, shouldn't we conduct an independent audit? The question landed like a grenade in Diane's carefully controlled environment. The board has complete authority over community financial matters, Diane replied, smoothing the lapels of her crimson-red blazer as she stood up. Her voice took on that sharp edge it acquired when questioned, and her glossy red lips were set in a tight line. Mr. Washington's complaint is nothing more than harassment designed to avoid compliance with legitimate standards. We will not be intimidated by outsiders who refuse to respect covenants protecting our property values. But the confidence that had characterized her previous pronouncements was missing, replaced by defensiveness that suggested she was beginning to understand the scope of the legal challenge she faced. She adjusted her black silk top, her movements sharp, her wavy wine-red hair shaking slightly with suppressed anger. David attended as my legal representative, and his presentation sent shockwaves through the room. Financial irregularities totaling over $200,000 vendor contracts awarded to board members' relatives, legal fees paid to Richard's firm exceeding market rates by 300% for services that appear to include harassment consultation rather than legitimate advice. These allegations are completely unfounded. Richard interjected from the back. But his interruption violated meeting procedures and revealed coordination between his firm and the HOA board that should have been independent. The meeting's climax came when Robert invoked Article 12 of the original bylaws, allowing residents to call community votes on financial transparency issues when supported by 15% of membership. The provision had been buried in documentation most residents never read, but it provided legal mechanism for overriding board decisions through direct democracy that Diane couldn't prevent. The formal vote to conduct an independent audit passed 15-8 despite Diane's opposition. It was the first time in years that a board decision had been overturned, and the precedent would make future challenges easier. Walking to my truck after the meeting, Sam Miller and 3 other neighbors approached me. Marcus, we've been talking about forming a reform coalition. Would you consider running for a board position? The invitation represented exactly the kind of democratic participation Diane's authoritarian approach had been designed to prevent. I'll definitely consider it, I replied, knowing that announcing my candidacy would trigger the most vicious retaliation Diane was capable of unleashing. That night, Linda and I sat on the ranch porch discussing the day's developments. Snow was falling softly, covering the land in white that seemed to muffle the ugliness of what we were fighting. She's going to come after us with everything she has, Linda observed. Let her, I replied. Every illegal action from this point forward just strengthens the case for criminal prosecution. The evening air carried the scent of winter and possibilities. Diane had built her empire on making people afraid, on crushing anyone who questioned her authority. But tonight had proven that communities could still choose justice when given the chance. The Reform Coalition was forming. The state investigation was beginning. And Diane Sullivan was about to discover that her reign of intimidation had finally met its match. The stars were emerging over Washington Ranch as we planned our next moves, the same stars that had guided Samuel as he'd envisioned, a community where neighbors supported each other instead of tearing each other down. That vision was about to be restored. And Diane was going to learn exactly how much damage 15 years of corruption could do when it finally caught up. 6 months into what Diane Sullivan had convinced herself was a righteous campaign to maintain community standards, her world began collapsing in ways she'd never anticipated. The morning brought news that would have destroyed most people's will to fight. The Internal Revenue Service had initiated a compliance review of my business operations based on an anonymous complaint alleging unreported income from commercial agricultural activities. While not a full audit, the review had triggered partial restrictions on my business accounts, cutting off cash flow that supported both ranch operations and mounting legal fees. The timing wasn't coincidental, and the sophistication revealed Diane's network extended deeper into municipal connections than I'd initially suspected. It was calculated to force financial surrender when legal intimidation had failed. David's recent conversations had taken on an increasingly pessimistic tone. Marcus, you need to understand the scope of what you're fighting, he'd said repeatedly, always emphasizing resources arrayed against us. Sometimes tactical retreat is the wisest strategy. That afternoon brought revelation that explained David's growing pessimism. I'd returned to his office to retrieve forgotten documents when I overheard him on a phone call. The IRS action should drain his resources within 60 days. David was saying, one more financial pressure point and he'll take the settlement. Diane was right about finding the leverage that matters most. The confrontation that followed was more devastating than any of Diane's official harassment. My college roommate and trusted legal counsel had been feeding our strategy to the opposition for weeks. "You understand this is bigger than you can handle," David said when I demanded explanation. "Diane has connections throughout county government. Richard's firm represents half the businesses in this area. Take the settlement offer and rebuild somewhere else." The settlement offer was indeed generous, $75,000 in exchange for dropping all complaints, agreeing to comply with all standards, and signing a non-disclosure agreement, preventing discussion of financial irregularities we'd uncovered. For most people facing IRS investigations and professional destruction, it would represent salvation. That evening brought the lowest point when Linda arrived, carrying news that forced us both to confront the real cost of challenging entrenched authority. Marcus. The mortgage servicer for my house received a legal inquiry from Richard's firm requesting review of my loan terms for potential technical violations. They're suggesting my involvement in HOA disputes might constitute undisclosed litigation affecting creditworthiness, even if baseless. The review process could destroy my credit rating. The threat to Linda's financial stability represented escalation beyond anything I'd experienced personally. Warfare that could destroy someone's life regardless of eventual legal outcome. They're betting most people will sacrifice principles to protect security. Linda continued, "Maybe they're right. I've watched what this fight cost you. Now they're threatening everything I've built. Sometimes I wonder if we're being stubborn instead of smart." The weight of responsibility for Linda's situation was crushing. Compounded by realization, my patient strategy had exposed her to retaliation that could have been avoided with different timing. Sitting in Samuel's study that night, surrounded by boxes of documents containing power to end this immediately, I wrestled with a decision that would determine not just our personal futures, but the kind of community Meadowbrook would become. The breakthrough came when I discovered Samuel's final document hidden in the ranch safe, a video recording made shortly before his death. If you're watching this, Marcus. It means they've moved beyond simple harassment into systematic attacks on innocent people, Samuel's voice said from the laptop screen. The corruption network has revealed its full scope. You now have everything needed to destroy it permanently. The video included contact information for federal authorities investigating municipal corruption in surrounding counties. Along with access codes for financial accounts Samuel had used to document illegal transactions between the HOA, Richard's firm, and various government officials. The evidence would trigger investigations protecting both Linda and community members who'd supported reform efforts. Diane thinks she's fighting a naive outsider who can be intimidated. Samuel continued. She has no idea she's been building a criminal case against herself, while someone with 4 decades of community development experience documented every violation. The federal complaint I filed the next morning was comprehensive presentation of accumulated evidence, painting a picture extending from the HOA through the building inspector's office to Richard's firm and beyond. Financial records showing systematic overbilling. Correspondence proving coordinated harassment campaigns, documented abuse of government processes violating multiple federal statutes designed to protect citizens from exactly this persecution. The response was measured but immediate. Within 24 hours, Linda received notification that mortgage review had been suspended pending resolution of ethical complaints against Richard's firm. My IRS review was flagged for priority resolution after preliminary investigation suggested the original complaint contained irregularities. Federal investigators acknowledged receipt and indicated preliminary protective measures would be implemented during their review. Marcus. How long was your grandfather planning this? Linda asked, As we watched December sunset over pastures that had become battleground, the precision of his documentation, the federal connections. This wasn't someone reacting. This was someone who saw corruption developing and spent years preparing to destroy it. Samuel had indeed been planning this since the day he'd resigned from the HOA board in disgust at Diane's direction. Years of careful documentation and strategic preparation had created a response that would activate the moment corruption revealed its full scope. Diane had spent 6 months building the foundation for her own destruction. Tomorrow, she would discover her reign was over. Federal investigators were reviewing evidence that would destroy both her authority and Richard's practice, while community members terrorized into silence finally had protection from retaliation that had controlled them for years. The patient strategy had worked as Samuel envisioned, but the human cost had been higher than anticipated. Linda and I had survived attacks that destroyed weaker people, and our relationship had been forged in shared principles most couples never faced. Whatever happened next, we'd proven that even the most sophisticated corruption eventually meets its match in people willing to endure whatever price justice demands. 7 months into what Diane Sullivan had convinced herself was a righteous defense of community values, the morning brought a phone call that would shatter everything she thought she understood about power in Meadowbrook. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Economic Crimes Unit requesting immediate meeting to discuss allegations of municipal corruption, mail fraud, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of authority. The press conference I called that afternoon drew every local media outlet within 50 miles, along with community members who'd been waiting years for someone to challenge the system, standing at the podium in the community center where Diane had ruled through intimidation for over a decade. I felt the weight of Samuel's legacy and responsibility of finally revealing truth that would restore justice. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marcus Washington. And for 7 months, I've been systematically documenting criminal activities by Meadowbrook Estates, Homeowners Association, and associated parties. I began watching Diane's glossy red lips part in shock in the front row. She was wearing the same outfit she'd worn the day we met, crimson red blazer, black silk top, black pencil skirt, but now, instead of looking like armor, the clothes seemed to constrain her as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Today, I'm here to reveal not just the scope of this corruption, but my legal authority to end it permanently. The authority revelation hit like a physical force. I presented the original 1991 property deed showing Washington Ranch had donated land for Meadowbrook's development, along with 2003 HOA incorporation documents granting permanent oversight authority to the founding family. For 7 months, Mrs. Sullivan has been harassing, fining, and threatening someone who legally holds supervisory authority over her organization. I continued. Every violation notice, every fine, every threat has been issued without legitimate authority against someone who could have ended her harassment on day one. The festival celebrated more than personal vindication. It marked Meadowbrook's transformation from a place people endured into community they actively chose. Property values had increased 34% under ethical management, eliminating harassment while maintaining genuine standards. Washington Ranch had evolved into something Samuel would have been proud. Working agricultural operation, employing 24 local residents while providing educational programs for community children, learning sustainable farming. The documentary crew from National Cable Network finished final interviews that morning, wrapping production on feature airing during prime time as part of their investigative series about grassroots justice movements. Marcus, Your story has inspired similar reform efforts in over 60 communities nationwide. Producer Jennifer Walsh announced, "The Washington model of HOA governance is being implemented from California to Florida." Linda's pregnancy announcement at the festival added personal celebration to community triumph. With neighbors who'd shared our struggle through months of harassment, now sharing joy at the life we'd created together. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced from the microphone near the barn. 1 year ago today. Some of you watched police cars come up this driveway because certain people thought they could intimidate a new neighbor. Too bad for them, that neighbor turned out to be someone who'd inherited both legal authority and moral responsibility to end their reign permanently. The crowd's response was everything I'd hoped. Laughter. Applause. Genuine celebration that comes from people who've survived something terrible together and emerged stronger. Diane Sullivan's complete destruction had become cautionary tale, studied in law schools and government ethics programs across the country. Her 42-month federal sentence was being served in minimum security facility where she spent days maintaining grounds, reminding her of the community standards she'd corrupted. Lifetime ban from HOA leadership ensured her expertise in harassment would never again threaten innocent families. Richard Thornfield's legal practice had collapsed entirely after 48-month sentence and permanent disbarment. Former clients discovered legal advice motivated by corruption left them vulnerable to lawsuits and criminal charges. The $2 to million civil judgment forced liquidation of assets accumulated through years of systematic theft. David Parker's 18-month sentence had been followed by complete exile from the legal profession. His betrayal becoming case study in legal ethics courses about consequences of prioritizing personal advantage over professional responsibility. Ripple effects extended far beyond Meadowbrook, with state legislation strengthening homeowners' rights and federal oversight of HOA activities becoming standard. The Washington Institute for Community Governance, established with recovered corruption funds, provided training and resources for residents fighting similar battles against authoritarian HOA leadership nationwide. Marcus. What advice would you give someone facing HOA harassment? Asked Amanda Clark from Channel 7. Document everything. Build coalitions with neighbors who share concerns. Never forget that bullies rely on victims being too intimidated to fight back. I replied, Diane Sullivan controlled this community for 15 years because people believed they were powerless. But corruption always contains seeds of its own destruction when confronted by people willing to endure temporary suffering for permanent justice. Evening concluded with ceremony dedicating Samuel Washington Memorial Garden, where native plants chosen for environmental sustainability created beauty without requiring obsessive maintenance. Diane's aesthetic standards had demanded. Garden centerpiece was bronze plaque inscribed with words capturing vision guiding both Samuel's original planning and our successful restoration. True community strength comes from neighbors supporting each other's success, not competing to find each other's failures. Linda and I walked through ranch property as December sunset painted western hills in gold and crimson. Our child would grow up in community where neighbors cooperated instead of reporting violations, where justice was possible when people had courage to stand together, and where lessons of this battle would prevent future generations from experiencing systematic oppression we'd endured and overcome. Your grandfather's strategy worked better than even he imagined. Linda said, he didn't just plan to destroy Diane's corruption, he created model protecting communities nationwide from similar abuse. Looking out over 1,000 acres that had become symbol of resistance to tyranny disguised as community governance, I felt weight of responsibility for both honoring legacy and ensuring future generations would inherit communities where justice was normal rather than exceptional. Diane Sullivan's attempt to corrupt Samuel's vision had ultimately strengthened it by proving corruption could be defeated when ordinary people found extraordinary courage to fight for what was right. Stars were emerging over Washington Ranch as we planned Agricultural Education Center, teaching sustainable farming while honoring Samuel's belief that communities prosper when people build together instead of tearing each other down. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight belonged to celebration of victory, proving democracy could survive any assault when defended by people understanding that freedom requires constant vigilance against those who would abuse authority for personal advantage. Diane Sullivan called police because she thought I was just another victim she could intimidate into submission. Too bad for her, she'd chosen to harass someone who'd inherited both legal authority and moral obligation to end her corruption permanently. The education she received would serve as warning to anyone else considering using community governance as cover for personal enrichment and systematic abuse of neighbors deserving better than living in fear of manufactured violations and arbitrary harassment. Justice had been served. Democracy had been restored, and Meadowbrook would prosper as the kind of community Samuel Washington had envisioned when he first donated land for development, benefiting everyone rather than enriching few at expense of many. The fight was over, the victory complete, and the future bright with possibilities that corruption could never again diminish or destroy.